Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and I'm here with camp notes for August 18th, 2023. So the Commanders practices, those joint practices are over. We still await the Commanders game on Monday night down in Landover. But in the meantime, Ravens back to their regular shell pads today. Participation is first order business, of course. NFIs are still Mullen, Voorhees, Moore, and Tyus Bowser. Still no word on exactly when Tyus Bowser is going to be back, but the other three are expected to miss the season. In terms of missed practices, Tyler Huntley still out. Laquan Treadwell still out. Morgan Moses, we think, got a vet day today. Pepe Williams is still out with significant injury. Rock Yassin has not yet returned. Arthur Mollett has not yet returned, missing a big opportunity there. Jaquan Amos is still out. And, of course, Marlon Humphrey, the new addition to that list, was missing the last couple of practices now, unfortunately. We'll have a little bit more on that later when we talk about Harbaugh and his time at the podium. New arrival in camp today, Ronald Darby is wearing number 33. There was some confusion on the rosters because Jordan Swan also listed as number 33. We're not sure if he was actually at practice. I only saw 133, and I think that was Darby playing a little bit of cornerback as a 2, not as a 1. But generally speaking, that's a positive thing to see him there and active. So good to see that. Hopefully we see some of him against the Commanders. And then on opening day, if all goes well, Darby should be one of the starting cornerbacks for the Baltimore Ravens. The other big news as practice was just starting, Jadeveon Clowney was in the building. He didn't practice, but he did sign with the Ravens. So a signing a lot of people had been advocating for. He'll join the outside linebacker room, as John Harbaugh said. Certainly brings a pass rush pedigree and a former number 1 overall draft pick. A little bit weird here, and this might be one of these things where the jersey number doesn't stick, so I'm not sure I'd buy a Clowney jersey just yet. He's going to wear number 24 is the talk. So number 24 went from Marcus Peters the last several seasons to Jadeveon Clowney this year. An odd kind of a turn of events, obviously. Did not even know that was a legal number for a pass rusher to wear. I know there are certain numbers which are only allowed at certain positions, and specifically 50s, 60s, and 70s as ineligible receivers that you have to have along that offensive line. And you have to report eligible with that sort of a number. But I guess there might not be a limit in terms of what number you can wear if you're a defensive end and or an edge player of some sort. And he is walking a different path. So let's hope he does the number proud. Back to very limited contact today. So no tackling. There were a couple people who went down during practice. Nobody that I am aware of getting hurt badly, but people getting knocked down on a run play and a little bit of additional contact on some pass plays as well. But this is back to a limited contact practice. We'll talk a little bit about the 11-on-11 and 7-on-7 action. There were highlights, offense and defense. I'm just going to include them together. I want this to be a relatively short show tonight, so I can get this out and you'll have it. So we can get to the what to look forward to on Washington against Washington show, which is coming up next. The first team offensive line, Stanley, unexpected, but he's back. Simpson at left guard. Linderbaum, Zeitler, and Faalele. There was no Morgan Moses today, who had a vet day off. A couple of things about this. John Simpson definitely seems to have the lead now in the competition with Saleh for that left guard spot. He outplayed him in the first game. I think if we're to look ahead and you were to look at what's an important thing to look for in the next game to see if Simpson's really got it, I think if he played very few snaps, like he played just a couple of series, maybe only played with the starters, I think that would be a pretty clear indication he's got the job won. If he and Saleh alternate all the way to the end of the game, it's just the opposite. Then Harbaugh is trying to send a message that left guard spot is not decided, and he wants those guys in there the whole time. So other possibilities are Simpson just plays the first quarter and a half and Salah takes over. If Salah plays a lot of snaps in this game, I think that would be quite a bad sign for him in terms of, even though it would be good for him to get the additional live fire, it would be a bad sign in terms of his likelihood of getting the starting job. So I think that's where we are on the offensive line right now. And were I to wager a few quatlus on this particular proposition, I'd say that Simpson is the likely starter for the Ravens come opening day. We'll see how that plays out. Of course, we're all interested in kind of holding our breath for who the corners might be with the ones. And the three guys out there today were Stevens, Seymour, and Washington, the same three that started the last preseason game. It will be very interesting to see how they are dealt with in the next game. Kayvon Seymour has been in the league a number of years. He hasn't had a tremendous amount of live fire on the outside, but he's had enough that he probably doesn't need a lot more. Brandon Stevens, real tough question because the Ravens certifiably need him at outside corner to start the season. And yet, on the other hand, he doesn't have a lot of experience there. And it would be of real value for him to get some live fire snaps in the preseason. So maybe they keep him in a little longer. Maybe they bubble wrap him. Really don't know. It'll be one of the very interesting things to look for on Monday night in terms of how they look to play him. Ardarius Washington playing in the slot. I feel certain he'll start the game, and I think he's the likely starter for the first regular season game at slot corner. But I think there's a question as to whether or not you leave him in for a long time in the Monday night game. So we addressed this in all three corner positions for a little bit longer on the what to look for versus the Commanders episode that I hope you'll take the time to download and listen to. In terms of other players and what they did today, Josh Johnson had quite a fine connection with Tariq Black for most of the day. It included a very nice-looking 9-yard back shoulder throw on the left side of the field that went for a touchdown. He was just one of the stars. I'll talk the biggest other offensive star was probably Keaton Mitchell, who twice turned on the Jets to get to the edge as a runner, including once by beating Trenton Simpson. So that actually was a really nice run. Good to see that burst out of him. And we didn't see quite as much from him as a receiver. He did have a drop during practice. So it wasn't all positive news for him, but I think he's positioning himself well. I think he'll get a nice long look in this next preseason game. And it really comes down to him or Gordon, or maybe him or no one in terms of who would be that fourth running back. So they've got an interesting set of decisions to make there on offense, and I think they'll certainly take the time to give Keaton Mitchell a look in this next preseason game. Number of defensive stars, and I didn't mention Lamar Jackson. He had actually a very accurate day throwing the ball today. Wasn't perfect. He did have at least one interception, and there were some other balls that were overthrown deep and whatnot. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get down to the 7-on-7 play, because that's where some of his good plays came on the day, to be certain. On defense, Michael Pierce had a pressure that flushed Lamar Jackson right out of the pocket for an incomplete. That was a nice play by him. Justin Matabike had a pressure that forced Jackson to throw a very long incomplete pass to Flowers, about 35 yards down the left sideline. Stevens, in particular, had a very good day in coverage, particularly on longer throws. That's very nice to see, by the way. There's really, I don't know what could be more important for the Ravens right now than making sure Brandon Stevens is looking good on the outside, because it looks like he's going to be facing some number one receivers going into the season. So definitely a very good look in that first preseason game, and I thought he looked pretty good today as well. Kelly Sanders had a sack of Anthony Brown. A ball was blown dead, and he was in there quickly. Nice play there. And I think he beat the right tackle, but I'm not sure if it was Faalele or McCary playing over there at that time. And I don't think it was not Sharp. So anyway, could have also been Cleveland. That's another possibility. But anyway, nice play for Kelly Sanders, and he's accumulated a few during camp and during that first preseason game. Looked pretty good. In terms of 7-on-7, there was some of the really good action today was just in those 7-on-7 drills. And the highlight of the day undoubtedly was a 25-yard diving touchdown in the left corner of the end zone by Bateman with Stevens and Washington nearby. Now, Stevens had a pretty good day in coverage. He was close on this play. Bateman really laid out for a ball. He's playing his first real action in non-individual drills today. He might have done it yesterday, but today was the first time I saw him there, and that catch in particular is a confidence builder. It looked really good, and Harbaugh was asked that question. He was asked to say, how does it lift Stevens' confidence? But the real thing, he answered the real question was, I'll tell you what, it lifts my confidence. And that's, of course, something we like to hear. But good catch for Bateman. It's got to feel good after being out for so long. Charlie Kolar dropped a short pass 5 yards between the numbers and the right hash. And that did not look so great. Had a great pass from Lamar, threading the needle with very good velocity to Andrews, who beat Patrick Queen for a 15-yard play. That was between the numbers and the left hash. And then just a few plays later, that same tandem beat Queen again for a 15-yard touchdown. It was right at the goal line between the hash and the right numbers. So same kind of area on the field, mirror image anyway of each other, and Queen beaten both times on the play. Daryl Worley picked up on some of the things he did in the first preseason game. He elevated to casually swat away a 20-yard pass intended for James Prochet down the left sideline. Really nice play. Shamar Bridges made a nice play to snatch a ball that appeared to be headed for an interception by Caillou Kelly, but he literally reached his hands out quick as you can be outside the frame, grabbed the ball, and took it away before Kelly could do anything about it. So I don't know whether to say that's great for Shamar Bridges. We certainly would like to see some great cornerback play from Caillou Kelly. So that was maybe a little disappointing there that he couldn't at least defense that pass. Lamar did throw, I think it was in the 2-minute drill, a late play interception to Kyle Hamilton in the end zone, kind of right underneath the uprights. Almost looked like the play had been blown dead or people had stopped trying or something, because the ball was out and nobody really on the whole field was moving, and it was just an easy interception in the middle of the end zone by Hamilton. So hopefully that's the kind of thing that wouldn't happen in a game situation. But good for Hamilton for being there at the right place. Kayvon Seymour had the day's other interception. It was in 7-on-7 near the right sideline, maybe about 10, 15 yards down the field. It wasn't particularly far down, but always nice to see a guy who can, swivel and get his head on the football pretty quickly. I know JAD was back at practice today. I didn't really see him on the field for either 7-on-7s or 11-on-11s. Doesn't mean he wasn't there, but he might have been in just individual drills today. Isaiah Likely was the other one who fits into that category. Ardarius Washington had a pass defense of Anthony Brown while covering Sean Ryan. Ryan, of course, had a big preseason game, including a fair amount of yak. Looked pretty good doing it. And Washington making a play like that is always good. You need to get him to get his hands on as many footballs as possible. I've said on this show, he kind of reminds me of Corey Ivy in terms of his height and his, in some ways, I think his demeanor in terms of his tenacity. And so I'm hoping that Washington brings some of that same thing. If you can get, the more times he can see the ball in the air, the more times he can read the quarterback and get in the lane, the more he can overcome some of his speed deficiencies to play the position. Ardarius Washington, of course, dropped out of the draft entirely after being fairly highly thought after. And then he ran a 4.62 and that will do it a lot of times. And he was not good enough to overcome that, became a priority free agent of the Ravens, who gave most of their UDFA money to him a couple of years ago. And he has not gotten on the field much in the time since. And so the real hope is that the payoff will come this year, because the Ravens need a slot corner. Ardarius is the last man standing. If you look at the other three, Stevens has moved to the outside. That's where they need him. Pepe Williams is on a injury that will probably keep him out at least half a season, my guess from reading the tea leaves here. And then Arthur Mollett, who was in camp earlier and actually made some nice plays on the ball, hasn't been back and healthy in now more than 2 weeks. So that's a shame. And it looks like Ardarius Washington has made good on this opportunity. And hopefully he continues to play well, and we'll see how long he plays in that next preseason game. Jackson overthrew Flowers 40 yards down the left sideline with Stevens in tight coverage. That's the last highlight I had mentioned, but I did want to make sure I got that one in because Stevens, although he gave up or was nearby in terms of the touchdown to Bateman, had a very nice day in coverage, generally speaking, against the receivers he faced. In terms of interviews, kind of a weird day. I just give you a little bit of story about camp. And
Film Study is brought to you by Factor. With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for those jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Then get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. And with Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in all of our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/ravens50 and use code ravens50 to get that 50% off. That's code ravens50 at factormeals.com/ravens50 to get 50% off.
And what this is like. So about 30 minutes before practice ends, they call for all the kids between, I think it's ages 6 and 14, to line up for autographs. And I don't think all those kids get autographs, but they're in position, and then they scream and they yell at the players at the top of the lungs. And of course, the place they do that is right over where the interviews are. And you can't even hear the questions from the other reporters. You really can't even hear what the interviewees are saying. So what Harbaugh or Greg Lewis, Greg Williams, Patrick Ricard were the guys today are saying. We just kind of have to do our best to understand it. Occasionally there's a break in the screaming somebody's name and asking for his autograph as he starts to walk away from the group. And you get a chance to hear things, but it is definitely a difficult thing and something the Ravens could improve upon for sure. So we'll talk about Harbaugh first. And again, if you want to check any of my hearing, I will not take offense. Please go out to the Ravens website, listen to these interviews. And as I've said, I'm trying to capture some of the nuance here going on. I will generally paraphrase people, and I encourage anyone to actually listen to these interviews and hear what was said. So Harbaugh mentioned that there is a timeline for Humphrey to return, but he's not going to tell us what it is. No surprise there. He used the word pretty early, or the phrase pretty early in the season is when he'll be back. He mentioned that Humphrey could have played on it, but the risk would be it would get worse, and he supports Humphrey's decision to get the surgery. Now, this is interesting because it kind of reminds me of the language he used with Bateman last year, where Bateman maybe could have played on his Lisfranc strain, which had not become the tear or whatever it became at the later point. And he said he supported Bateman in the decision to get the surgery early. There was between the lines, there was some hope that Bateman would play through the injury last year. And maybe in some sense, it's fortunate that he's back now on the field and making a big catch today. But with Humphrey, he still says he'll be back pretty early in the season. He talked a little bit about Jadeveon Clowney joining the outside linebacker room. Said he's a guy they'd like to have out there on third down. Did not really mention Clowney's run stopping ability, that he might be out there the way JPP was, say, last year on early downs to both provide some pass rush and also a little bit of run defense. So he mentioned primarily, effectively being a situational pass rusher, which the Ravens do seem to have a lot of already in terms of Ajabo and Tavius Robinson. If you listen to the what to look for in the Commanders game, Frazier made the point that he thought one of the things they're getting from is Clowney, and it in part is a reaction to the poor edge setting of Ajabo and Tavius Robinson in that first preseason game. I think that's a reasonable point. It's not necessarily right on the money. I kind of think Clowney is another rush linebacker, but he's been used as effectively a defensive end in Cleveland, where he and Myles Garrett have a side, and neither one of those is really asked to cover much. So I don't think that's where they're looking for from Clowney, and maybe they feel like they don't need as much flexibility if they have Jadeveon as one of their pass rushers. He did say Darby should play some in the preseason. I think I have that right. He was talking about Darby and not Clowney, but once again, difficult to hear there. Darby practiced today. He was in some 11-on-11 drills. He was in some 7-on-7, but he did not play with the first team in 11-on-11s. So I do expect he'll be out there. He'll be getting real preseason reps in this next game, along with some other guys that we certainly hope see some time. Caillou Kelly really needs to make his mark in terms of what he's got. And JAD really needs to be out there. He's missed basically every live fire opportunity he's ever been presented with by either injury or ineffectiveness. So he needs to get out there and show what he can do. Move on to Greg Lewis in just a second. All right, Greg Lewis, the wide receivers coach. He talked a little bit about, got a good question about what do you tell the wide receivers competing at the end of the roster. And he said, after some other things about, telling about, where they are now and, now what are you going to do with it kind of thing. He talked about telling his own story about being the bottom of the roster with the Eagles and the 16th wide receiver. I don't know if that could possibly be true, but, that he overcame that and got to play in the league some. So Greg is he's good at the podium. I can see why he would relate very well to wide receivers in the room, and especially those who don't come necessarily with the pedigree. Also, because he's got a reputation from working with the Chiefs, he certainly would be someone who would carry some gravitas in terms of being able to improve any player. And it makes it that much better when Odell Beckham will listen to you and really wants to be coached. He talked about OBJ a little bit, and he progressed physically, as have all the receivers. That's just normal for anyone to progress physically from, when they first show up at OTAs to this point now, where the season is coming up soon. He's good about not putting receivers ahead of each other. He said he was asked a question about Zay Flowers getting better at something, or maybe the question was, what can Zay Flowers get better at? And he said he wants all receivers to be better at all aspects of the game. Catching, yak, route running were three things he mentioned. He might have mentioned more, but those were three. And so that's a kind of a good coach speak answer to that question. You're not picking out one player that you really love for reasons A, B, C, and D, and saying, I wish all my other receivers could be like him. That can get annoying to the other receivers. But I thought Greg Lewis does a good job at the podium with that. His partner, Greg Williams, was up next. Now, Greg, and I believe Greg is the assistant receivers coach. I don't know if the titles actually work out this way, but I believe Greg Williams reports to Greg Lewis. Greg Williams, I've mentioned many times, I have a great deal of respect for him as a very technical wide receiving coach. Really seems to teach deceleration very well in terms of how you decelerate both to make a double move and to break off a route. And a lot of scouts will call it sitting in the chair is something you need to do to help decelerate. But if you watch him, he pantomimes his way through it, by getting low to decelerate. And that's something that I think he preaches above a lot of other things in terms of making a break at the top of the stem. It seems like the OBJ and Lamar relationship question got asked on every single podium speaker today, which I'm officially tired of hearing it. And he said that chemistry comes with reps with the two of them. So, things may not be completely perfect right now. I'm sure they're not exactly where they want them to be in terms of getting the ball out there. The fact that these guys practice together is obviously a good sign. The fact that they practice with Flowers is that much better a sign. The fact that there weren't other defenders there means you have to take some of the value of that connection with a grain of salt. And I think there's still things you can gain. If you want to play with a helmet and you want to learn how to take the ball over one shoulder or exactly what you're going to be looking at to track a football, I think that's valuable. I think it's valuable for Jackson to see how a receiver reacts to the ball going off either shoulder, how well he turns for the ball, how he can time up a trusted back shoulder throw. I think there are some things you can learn, but without defenders, and maybe this back shoulder throw even falls into that category, I think you need to be careful about what's going on, because that defender, not only does he create problems for the receiver, but he creates problems for the quarterback too, who wants nothing more than to avoid interceptions. The Ravens do these 11-on-0 drills where they have players in colored, coaches or interns in colored shirts lining up against the 11-man team. And that's not really doing a whole lot for me. The ball gets zipped around. Every pass is open. Nobody's ever tried for an interception on a ball, even if they've been close. And nobody really even tries to stay that close. They just kind of pantomime what the defense is doing at the beginning of their sequence, and then they let the athletes go. And the offense, always seems to get a completion and take it in from there. So anyway, good to see Greg Williams out there. I was asked one other question was, what advice does he have for Rashad Bateman? And that's the boiled down question that was longer than that. He said, look forward. Don't worry about what might have been in these first couple of years in the league. Worry about this coming year. He's not exactly in a contract year, but he is in a year where the Ravens are going to have to decide at the end about his fifth-year option. So from that sense, it's a contract year and one where it's certainly going to determine a fair amount of his future career earnings at his chosen craft here. So he needs a big season. I certainly hope the Ravens get it from him, because he's one of the Ravens' real opportunities to have a great wide receiver is Bateman. I think they're much less likely to get that sort of a surprise out of OBJ. They may get it from Flowers as well, by the way. But if it were Flowers and Bateman were the top two receivers on this team, that would be what I'd want to sign up for, because those are the guys who will be with the Ravens, hopefully in the long term. Patrick Ricard was the last interview. The first question they asked was, so fullback going forward from and he went to immediately, a guy who's very practiced with interviews, said, it's just wherever the team needs me. I've lined up all over. I'm happy to play wherever I have the most value, can create the most value for the team. Perfect answer to the interview question. And he did well. He did say he misses playing defense when asked which is the most fun. So he said he did miss that. He couldn't lie, but that was a good one. Then he was asked a little bit about the hip injury and the nature of that and recovery. And he talked a little bit about the evolution of it during the season last year. And he said the pain in his hip was similar to the other hip 2 years before. So he knew it was going to be a torn labrum, and he was focused on trying to get through the season with the hip in the shape it was in. And my first reaction to that, I'm just shaking my head at how tough that sounds, because we've had all kinds of players sit out for injuries. Ben Powers sat out with turf toe. You could point to Lamar in terms of last year and whether or not he could have played. I wouldn't do that, but there's other players who've sat out with much less significant injuries. I would say, that the Ravens have maybe hoped would not get surgery, but they've gotten it anyway. Patrick Ricard manned through that very difficult pain, and it just gives every impression of being an extremely tough individual in doing so when he's up there. You asked him about the biggest difference in Monken's offense is spreading it out, the increased explosiveness. Didn't really talk too much about how that impacted him, but one of the things that came out of camp today, and it's really been true for a lot of it, is it hasn't been just Ricard lining up in the backfield. They've been lining up with other tight ends in the backfield as well. And I do question whether or not that means they might be thinking about cutting Ricard. Now, if they did so, I think the reason for it would be they just don't believe he's ready to give him the kind of quality of play that he's given in the past because of the injury. That would have to be it, because the savings is not so great at 1.75 million. And at 1.75 million, they have to pay somebody else 750,000 at a bare minimum. So if it's Mason or if it's Vokalek, who they have in the roster, in his place. So the savings is really only about $1 million towards the cap. That's not nothing, but it's not necessarily enough that you give up a Pro Bowl fullback. So I'd have to think it would be based on a fear of reduced effectiveness that they would make such a cut. But anyway, great to hear Ricard at the stand. Definitely knows how to handle an interview, and talking about his own injury was definitely the most interesting thing that he did. That's going to do it for this abbreviated episode of Camp Notes. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're out there and you'd like to be on a film study short, there's always opportunities to do that. Hit me up with a DM on Twitter. They are always open. Usually I just have a phone call with people. We talk about their idea for an episode. We maybe massage it, beat it back and forth, play a little racquetball with it, and then hopefully get to an idea that will work. And usually we're recording very quickly from that point. But I don't need a whole lot, 2 or 3 bullet points on here's what I had in mind for a show. Drop them to me in a DM again, like I said, and I'll respond very quickly. Thanks again to everybody who's been listening. I will ask folks, if you don't mind, we will ask for the next couple of months, maybe once a week, if people will give us a review. We appreciate those reviews. There's a great set out there online, and it's also important that we keep getting recent reviews for algorithm purposes. And so the more you can, if you don't mind taking the time to give an additional review, would really appreciate that. And there's multiple places you can do that in terms of the podcast apps, and any of them are appreciated. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.